The ex-wife hid the results from the wealthy CEO about their only son. Now he needs his rare blood type. The doctor's uncomfortable silence stretched between them like a chasm opening in the earth. Sir, based on these results, it's not possible for you to be Ethan's biological father. Have you ever kept a secret that felt like poison in your veins? When is protecting someone actually destroying them? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The richest man in Houston discovered that all his billions couldn't buy him the one thing his dying son needed most, his blood. What would you sacrifice everything for? Only to discover it was never really yours. Have you ever loved someone so completely that losing them would destroy you? Tonight, a father's worst nightmare becomes a man's greatest betrayal. But what Michael discovers next will make you question everything you thought you knew about family. Michael Turner owned half of Texas. Oil wells, tech companies, real estate empires that stretched from Dallas to the Gulf Coast. His mansion in River Oaks had 12 bedrooms, a wine cellar worth more than most people's houses, and a garage full of cars that cost more than college educations. But none of that mattered now. The stadium lights blazed down on the pristine field where his son had just been king of his world. Now, those same lights glared harsh and merciless through the ambulance windows as paramedics worked over Ethan's unconscious form. Daddy, is he going to be okay? The question came from somewhere behind him, but Michael couldn't turn away from his 16-year-old son's pale face. Ethan looked so small on that stretcher, nothing like the 6-foot quarterback who'd been throwing perfect spirals just minutes before. He collapsed during the play, the coach was saying, jogging alongside the ambulance. Just went down like something hit him, but nobody was even near him. The hospital emergency room smelled like fear and disinfectant. Michael paced the waiting area, his $1,000 shoes squeaking against linoleum floors that had seen too much tragedy. Other families huddled in plastic chairs, their problems suddenly feeling smaller as they watched the billionaire businessman fall apart in real time. Mr. Turner? The doctor's voice cut through his panic. We need to talk. Michael followed him into a small room with beige walls and certificates that meant nothing right now. Your son has a rare blood disorder. We need an immediate transfusion to stabilize him. Then do it. Michael pulled out his phone, ready to call his pilot. I'll fly in specialists from anywhere. Money's not an issue. It's not about money, sir. It's about blood type. Ethan has a very rare type, AB negative with additional markers. We need a family member match. Test me. Michael rolled up his sleeve without hesitation. I'm his father. 20 minutes later, the doctor returned with results that would change everything. His face told the story before his mouth opened. Mr. Turner, I'm afraid you're not a match. What do you mean I'm not a match? He's my son. The doctor's uncomfortable silence stretched between them like a chasm opening in the earth. Sir, based on these results, it's not possible for you to be Ethan's biological father. The room spun. Michael gripped the chair arm, his knuckles white against the fake leather. That's impossible. Run the test again. We ran it twice, sir. The results are definitive. 16 years of memories flashed through his mind like a broken movie reel. Teaching Ethan to throw a football in their backyard. Late-night talks about girls and grades. Proud moments watching him quarterback the high school team to state championships. Every bedtime story. Every scraped knee he'd kissed better, every I love you, Dad, that had made his chest swell with pride. All of it built on a lie. We need to find his biological father immediately, the doctor continued. Without a blood match, Ethan has maybe 6 hours. Michael's phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds as he scrolled to Danielle's number. His ex-wife answered on the first ring. Michael? How's Ethan? Is he? We need to talk. His voice came out flat, empty. It's about Ethan's real father. The silence on the other end of the line lasted forever. When Danielle finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Oh God, drop a heartbreak emoji if you've ever felt your world shatter in a single moment. What would you do if everything you believed was a lie? As the doctor's words echoed in the sterile hospital corridor, we need the biological father immediately. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Danielle. We need to talk. It's about Ethan's real father. She had 16 years to practice this conversation, but when her ex-husband stood at her door demanding the truth, every rehearsed word died in her throat. The drive from Houston to Atlanta should have taken 4 hours. Michael made it in 3, pushing his Ferrari past every speed limit, past every rational thought. His phone kept ringing. The hospital, his assistant, business partners who didn't know his world had just ended. He ignored them all. Danielle's duplex in Midtown Atlanta looked exactly like what it was, a nurse's modest home in a neighborhood where people worked real jobs and worried about real problems. The same woman who'd once lived in his River Oaks mansion now had a mailbox that needed paint and a front porch that sagged slightly on one side. She opened the door before he could knock. 16 years had been kind to her. She was still beautiful, still carried herself with that quiet strength that had first attracted him. But her eyes held secrets now and fear. Michael, I don't. He pushed past her into the small living room. The furniture was secondhand, but clean, photos of Ethan covering every surface. Pictures of his son, their son, no, her son, growing up in a world Michael had never seen. Little league games he'd missed because he'd been building his empire. School plays he'd skipped because deals couldn't wait. How long have you known? His voice sounded strange in the small space, too loud, too angry. Danielle closed the door and leaned against it like she was afraid he might run. Since the day he was born. 16 years. Michael turned to face her, and she took a step back. 16 years I've been loving a lie. You loved him every day. That wasn't a lie, Michael. That was real. Her small Atlanta duplex seemed to shrink under his designer suit and barely contained rage. The same hands that had once traced her skin with worship now clenched into fists at his sides. He remembered their last night together before the separation, desperate, angry sex that was goodbye disguised as reconciliation. She'd cried afterward, and he'd thought it was because she didn't want him to leave. Now he wondered if she'd been crying about something else entirely. Tell me about him. Michael's voice dropped to a whisper that was more dangerous than shouting. Tell me about the man whose blood can save my son. Danielle wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking smaller. It was during our separation. You remember, you'd moved out after that fight about the Singapore deal. You said business came first. So you found comfort elsewhere. I found loneliness, Michael. I found emptiness and too much wine and someone who listened when I cried about losing you. She moved toward the couch, gesturing for him to sit. He remained standing. It was one night. One stupid, desperate night. Ooh, the word hung between them like a blade. Danielle's hands shook as she reached for the coffee table, steadying herself. Someone you know. Michael's blood turned to ice. Who, Danielle? James Morrison. The name hit him like a physical blow. James Morrison, his former business partner, his closest friend, the man who tried to steal his first major oil deal and nearly succeeded. The same James Morrison who'd cost him millions in legal fees and sleepless nights. The bastard who'd smiled at their wedding and shaken his hand while plotting to destroy everything Michael had built. Michael's knees nearly buckled. James? You slept with James. It wasn't supposed to happen. We ran into each other at that bar downtown, the one we used to go to in college. He was drunk, I was heartbroken, and we both made a mistake. A mistake that made my son. Your son, Michael. Biology doesn't change that. You're the one who taught him to ride a bike, who stayed up all night when he had pneumonia, who cheered louder than anyone at his games. You're his father in every way that matters. Have you ever kept a secret that felt like poison in your veins? When is protecting someone actually destroying them? Tell me in the comments. Michael stared at the photographs lining Danielle's mantle. Ethan at every age, every milestone, every moment of a life Michael had thought he understood. His phone buzzed with another call from the hospital. Time was running out. I have to call him, Michael said, pulling out his phone. I have to ask the man who destroyed my business to save my son. Michael, there's something else you need to know about that night. Danielle's voice was barely audible. Something about why I never told you the truth. When she whispered the biological father's name, Michael's knees nearly buckled. It wasn't just anyone. It was James Morrison, his former business partner, the man who had tried to destroy his empire and nearly succeeded. The man who could save his son was the same man who had tried to destroy his life, and now Michael had to beg for his help. The Gulf of Mexico stretched endlessly below as Michael's private jet cut through storm clouds toward the oil rig where James Morrison had built his own empire. Lightning split the darkness outside, mirroring the war in his chest between paternal love and masculine pride. Michael remembered the night Danielle and James had been together, though he hadn't known it then. He'd been in Singapore, closing the deal that would make him his first $100 million. While he'd been shaking hands and signing contracts, his wife had been falling apart in Atlanta, seeking comfort in the arms of the one man Michael trusted never to betray him. The irony tasted like blood in his mouth. James had always been the charmer. Smooth where Michael was rough, patient where Michael was driven. In college, women flocked to James's easy smile, while Michael buried himself in business books. Even then, Michael had worked twice as hard to achieve half of what seemed to come naturally to his best friend. Until the Singapore deal changed everything. James had tried to undercut him, stealing clients and spreading rumors about Michael's financial stability. The friendship died in lawyers' offices and boardroom battles that lasted 3 years. Michael had won, barely, but the victory had cost him his marriage and, apparently, his son. The rig's helicopter pad appeared through the storm like an island of steel and flame. As the chopper settled onto the platform, Michael could see workers in hard hats and safety vests, their faces turned up toward the unexpected arrival. None of them knew that their boss was about to face the past he'd spent 16 years trying to forget. James Morrison's office hadn't changed much. Still the same commanding view of the Gulf. Still the same mixture of luxury and functionality that marked a man who'd built his fortune with his own hands. But the man behind the desk looked up with eyes that held secrets, and when he saw Michael, his face went pale. "I've been waiting 16 years for this conversation, Michael. I know why you're here. Then you know my son is dying. Our son." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He lunged forward, hands flat on the desk that separated them. "Don't you dare. You lost the right to call him that when you tried to destroy me." James stood slowly, and Michael realized his former friend had aged well. Success agreed with him. The gray at his temples made him look distinguished rather than old, and his build suggested he still worked out regularly. The same man who'd once been his brother now faced him across a desk worth millions. "I've loved that boy from a distance for 16 years, James said quietly. "Every football game, every birthday, every Christmas, I've watched him grow up in newspapers and social media posts, proud of what he was becoming and sick with the knowledge that I could never tell him the truth. Distance doesn't make you a father. Neither does ignorance." They stared at each other across the divide of years and betrayal. Outside, the storm was getting worse, rain lashing the windows that separated them from the dark Gulf waters. "He needs a blood transfusion," Michael said finally. "The doctors say he has maybe 4 hours left, and you need my blood to save him. I need you to get on that helicopter and fly back to Houston with me." James walked to the window, his back to Michael. "Do you remember that last night before our business fell apart? We were both drunk, celebrating the Singapore contracts, and you said something I never forgot." Michael didn't want to remember, but the words came back anyway. "I said family was the only thing that mattered in the end. You said blood was thicker than oil." James turned back to face him. "You were right, Michael. Just not the way either of us expected. What matters more, the man who made a child or the man who raised him? Have you ever had to swallow your pride to save someone you love?" The oil rig stretched into the Gulf like a steel island, its flames burning orange against the endless water. Here, where fortunes were made from what lay buried beneath, 2 men excavated secrets that had been hidden just as deep. "I'll do it," James said, already reaching for his jacket. "I'll give him my blood, fly to Houston, do whatever it takes to save his life. But I want something in return." Michael's jaw tightened. "Name your price. I want to meet him. Not as a stranger, not as your business associate. I want him to know who I am." "Absolutely not." "Then watch him die, Michael, because that's my only condition." James agreed to the blood transfusion, but his condition stopped everyone cold. "I want joint custody. If my blood saves his life, I want to be part of it." Danielle's gasp echoed Michael's thoughts. Some prices were too high to pay. Two men who had once been brothers now faced each other across a desk worth millions, fighting over a son one had made and the other had loved. The helicopter lifted off from the oil rig just as the storm reached its peak. Through the aircraft's windows, Michael watched James's empire disappear into the darkness below, a maze of steel platforms and burning gas flares that had made his former friend rich enough to be dangerous. "You can't be serious about custody," Michael shouted over the rotor noise. "Dead serious," James replied, checking his watch. "We have 3 hours to get to Houston. 3 hours to figure out how this works." "This doesn't work, James. There is no this. You give your blood to save Ethan, then you disappear back to your rig and stay out of our lives." James turned in his seat to face Michael directly. The years had been kinder to him than they'd been to Michael. Where business stress had lined Michael's face and grayed his hair early, James looked like he'd found peace in his offshore empire. Success without the cost of sleepless nights and broken relationships. "I've been writing letters to him for 16 years, James said quietly. "Never sent them, but I wrote them anyway. Every birthday, every Christmas, every time I saw his picture in the paper after a football game. I know he likes history more than math, that he wants to study marine biology, that he broke his arm when he was 8 trying to climb that old oak tree in your backyard. How do you know about the tree? I drive by sometimes, when I'm in Houston on business." James's voice carried a note of longing that Michael had never heard before. "I park down the street and watch him shoot basketballs in your driveway, and I wonder what it would be like if he knew I existed." The helicopter banked toward the mainland, leaving the Gulf behind. Below them, the lights of Texas stretched toward Houston like a galaxy of possibilities and problems. "You had your chance to be a father 16 years ago," Michael said. "You chose business over family then. You chose to try to destroy me instead of building something with Danielle. I didn't know she was pregnant. Would it have mattered?" The question hung between them in the aircraft's cramped cabin. James stared out at the storm clouds, his reflection ghost-like in the window. "I was in love with her first, you know," he said finally, "before you ever met her. We dated in college, broke up because I was too scared to commit. Then you came along with your certainty and your plans, and she fell for the man who knew exactly what he wanted." Michael felt something twist in his chest, jealousy mixed with the sick realization that he'd never known this piece of history. "She never told me. Why would she? You were her future. I was just her past catching up at the worst possible moment." The oil rig stretched into the Gulf like a steel island, its flames burning orange against the endless water. Here, where fortunes were made from what lay buried beneath, two men excavated secrets that had been hidden just as deep. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Danielle. "How much longer? The doctors are getting worried. She's scared," Michael said, showing James the message. "So am I." James's admission surprised them both. "What if my blood doesn't work? What if we're too late? What if 16 years of watching from a distance ends with me watching him die? Then we'll have tried everything." "Will we?" "Because it feels like we're about to try tearing his world apart instead." The helicopter began its descent toward Houston's skyline. In 30 minutes, they'd be at the hospital. In an hour, James would be giving his blood to save a son he'd never been allowed to claim. After that, everything would change. Can love exist without knowledge? Can responsibility exist without biology? Share your thoughts on what makes a real father. Michael looked at his phone again. Missed calls from the hospital, from his lawyers, from business associates who had no idea his empire might be about to crumble. Everything he'd built could survive market crashes and oil spills, but it couldn't survive the truth about his family. "There's something else," James said as the landing pad came into view. "Something about that night with Danielle that you need to understand. I don't want to hear about it." She was crying, Michael. The whole time, she was crying and saying your name. "Even when she was with me, she was thinking about you. That's the woman you married. The one who loved you so much that sleeping with another man broke her heart." James agreed to the blood transfusion, but his condition stops everyone cold. "I want joint custody. If my blood saves his life, I want to be part of it." Danielle's gasp echoed Michael's thoughts. Some prices were too high to pay. Three people who had once shared love and betrayal now raced against time in a private jet, carrying secrets that could heal one life while destroying others. Danielle was waiting at the helicopter pad when they landed in Houston, her face pale in the harsh lights of the medical center's helipad. She looked older than when Michael had left her in Atlanta. Fear had a way of aging people in real time. "How is he?" Michael asked, jumping down from the aircraft before the rotors stopped spinning. "Stable, but barely. The doctors are prepping for the transfusion." She looked past him to where James was climbing out of the helicopter, and something passed between them. Recognition, regret, a shared understanding of the magnitude of what they'd all set in motion. "Hello, Danielle." "James." The greeting carried 16 years of weight. These were two people who had created life together, but never created a relationship, who shared the most intimate connection possible while remaining strangers. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. "Thank you for finally telling the truth." They moved through the hospital corridors like survivors of the same disaster, their footsteps echoing in the late-night quiet. Nurses and doctors recognized Michael. His donations had built half the cardiac wing. But tonight he wasn't the billionaire benefactor. He was just a father trying to save his son. "Mr. Turner?" Dr. Harrison met them at the elevator. "We need to prep Mr. Morrison immediately. Ethan's condition is deteriorating." As they rode up to the surgical floor, the elevator's confined space became a confessional where 16 years of buried truth finally found oxygen. The mechanical hum couldn't drown out the sound of hearts breaking and mending simultaneously. "I need you both to know something," Danielle said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That night, it wasn't just about being lonely. It wasn't just about you being gone, Michael." Both men turned to look at her, and she pressed herself against the elevator wall as if she could disappear into the metal. "I thought you were leaving me for good. The Singapore deal, the late nights, the way you'd started looking at me like I was holding you back for something bigger. I convinced myself you didn't love me anymore. I was working for us," Michael said. "For our future. I know that now. But then, I felt invisible. Like I was married to a ghost who came home just long enough to change clothes." The elevator dinged softly as they reached the surgical floor, but none of them moved. "James was kind to me that night," Danielle continued. "Not seductive, not manipulative. Just present. He listened when I cried. He held me when I broke down, and for a few hours I felt like someone actually saw me." "Did you love him?" Michael asked, the question cutting through him like broken glass. "No, I loved you. Even when I hated you, even when I felt forgotten, even when I was with him, I loved you." Her voice broke. "That's what made it so wrong. That's why I could never tell you." James reached out and touched her shoulder gently. "You don't have to explain, Danielle. We all made choices we regret." "Do you regret it?" Michael asked him, knowing what it cost. James looked through the elevator's small window toward the surgical wing where Ethan was fighting for his life. "I regret the timing. I regret the betrayal. I regret that it took 16 years and a medical crisis to bring us all together. But I don't regret that night because that night gave the world Ethan." Have you ever made one decision that changed everything? When fear drives us to lie, who gets hurt more, the liar or the ones being protected? The elevator doors opened with a mechanical whisper, revealing the sterile brightness of the surgical floor. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, their soft-soled shoes silent on polished linoleum. Somewhere beyond the double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only," a 16-year-old boy lay unconscious, his life hanging in the balance. "Mr. Morrison, we need to get you prepped immediately," Dr. Harrison said, appearing with a wheelchair. "The transfusion needs to happen within the next hour." As James settled into the wheelchair, he looked up at Michael and Danielle. "Whatever happens after this, custody, visitation, explanations to Ethan, we figure it out together. All three of us." "Agreed," Danielle said quickly. Michael hesitated, then nodded. "Agreed." 30,000 feet above the Gulf, the jet's cabin became a confessional where 16 years of buried truth finally found oxygen. The engine's roar couldn't drown out the sound of hearts breaking and mending simultaneously. The hospital called mid-flight with devastating news. Ethan was slipping away faster than expected. They had less than 2 hours to save him, but the plane couldn't land fast enough. Unless, at 40,000 feet, a father's love proved that sometimes the most desperate acts happen in the most impossible places. The phone call came when they were still 20 minutes from Houston. Dr. Harrison's voice crackled through the aircraft's communication system, competing with engine noise and the storm raging outside. Ethan's blood pressure is dropping fast. We can't wait for you to land. Michael gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. What are you saying? We need to attempt the transfusion now, or we're going to lose him. The jet's cabin transformed into something between a medical bay and a prayer chapel. James was already rolling up his sleeve, his face pale but determined. The flight attendant, who'd seen everything in 20 years of flying billionaires and their crises, moved with practiced efficiency to clear space and gather supplies. "This is insane," Danielle whispered, but she was already helping sterilize equipment. "We're not doctors." "No, but I am." Dr. Sarah Chun stepped forward from the back of the cabin. Michael's personal physician, who'd been on standby for the Singapore trip that never happened. "I can do this, but it's risky. At this altitude, with these conditions." "Do it." James was already lying flat on the cabin's leather seating. "Whatever it takes." The jet lurched through turbulence, and everyone grabbed for handholds. Outside, lightning split the sky like cracks in black glass. Inside, they prepared to attempt something that belonged in a medical textbook under the chapter titled Procedures You Should Never Try. "James, you need to understand," Dr. Chin said, inserting the four-line with steady hands despite the aircraft's movement. "At this altitude, with your blood pressure changing, you could go into shock. You could die up here. Then I die trying to save my son." The words hung in the recycled air of the cabin. My son. Not Michael's son, not their son, but his son. The possessive pronoun carried 16 years of longing and regret. Michael watched the blood flow through clear plastic tubing into collection bags, dark red life force that might be Ethan's salvation. Every ounce that left James's body was hope flowing toward a boy who didn't even know his biological father existed. "How much do you need?" James asked, his voice already weaker. "A lot," Dr. Chin answered honestly. "More than I'm comfortable taking at this altitude." "Take it." 20 minutes into the procedure, James's lips started turning pale. His breathing became shallow, and his hand trembled when he tried to reach for the water bottle Danielle offered him. "That's enough," Michael said, moving toward the medical setup. "You're going to kill yourself." "Not your call," James managed, though his voice was barely a whisper. "Actually, it is." Michael sat down beside the makeshift medical station. "Ethan needs a living donor, not a dead martyr. If you die up here, he dies down there." The jet hit another patch of turbulence, and the medical equipment rattled against the cabin walls. Dr. Chin steadied the blood bags with one hand while monitoring James's pulse with the other. "We have enough," she announced. "Barely, but enough." As they began the descent toward Houston, James drifted in and out of consciousness. Danielle knelt beside him, holding his hand, whispering words of gratitude and apology that came too late and too early at the same time. "I'm sorry," she said, thinking he couldn't hear her. "For all of it. For not telling you about the baby, for letting you find out this way, for 16 years of silence." James squeezed her hand weakly. "Don't apologize for protecting him. You did what you thought was right." Michael watched this exchange from across the cabin, feeling something unexpected twist in his chest. Not jealousy exactly, but recognition. These two people had created life together, even if it was by accident, even if it was wrapped in betrayal and regret. What would you risk for a child who isn't biologically yours? When does love trump everything else? Share your most selfless moment. The plane's wheels touched down at Houston International with a jarring thud that woke James from his blood-loss stupor. Airport emergency crews were waiting. Dr. Harrison had arranged for immediate transport to the medical center. "Can you walk?" the paramedic asked James as they prepared to move him from the aircraft to the ambulance. "I can crawl if I have to," James replied, though his legs shook when he tried to stand. The ambulance ride became a race against time and biology. James's blood, stored in medical-grade containers, traveled in a separate vehicle toward the hospital where Ethan lay dying. Two ambulances carrying father and salvation, speeding through Houston streets slick with rain. Vitals are dropping, the paramedic reported, monitoring James's condition. Blood pressure's too low, heart rate's erratic. Danielle rode in the ambulance with James, while Michael followed in his car, both vehicles cutting through traffic with sirens blaring and lights flashing. The city that had made them all successful now seemed like an obstacle course designed to keep them from their destination. "Stay with me, James," Danielle urged, her voice cutting through his growing delirium. "Stay awake. Ethan needs you to stay awake." "Is he going to be okay?" James asked, his words slurring slightly. "Both of you are going to be okay," she said, though her voice carried more hope than certainty. As they landed in Houston, James collapsed from blood loss. Now the man who might have saved Ethan was fighting for his own life, and Michael realized with shocking clarity that he couldn't lose either of them. In the ICU waiting room, a woman sat between two men, the husband who had loved her and the lover who had never stopped, both fighting for lives that defined her world. The ICU waiting room at Houston Methodist smelled like industrial disinfectant and despair. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead while three people who had once destroyed each other now clung together in shared terror. "Any word on James?" Michael asked, returning from his third trip to the nurse's station in an hour. "Still critical," Danielle replied, her voice hoarse from crying and exhaustion. They had to give him 2 units of blood to replace what he lost. The altitude made everything worse. Michael slumped into the plastic chair beside her, these uncomfortable seats becoming their world for the past 6 hours. Down the hall, Ethan was receiving James's blood through 4 lines and machinery that hummed with the sound of life support. In another room, James fought to recover from the sacrifice that might have killed him. "This is my fault," Danielle whispered. "All of it. The lie, the separation, that night with James. If I'd been stronger, if I'd been honest from the beginning." "Stop." Michael reached over and took her hand, their fingers interlocking automatically after years of marriage muscle memory. "We all made choices. You were protecting everyone the only way you knew how." Outside the waiting room windows, Houston's skyline glittered with lights from buildings that housed the empires they'd all built. Oil companies, tech firms, real estate developments that had made them wealthy beyond measure. But none of that money could buy what they needed now: time, forgiveness, and the promise that both James and Ethan would survive the night. "Do you remember our first date?" Danielle asked suddenly. Michael smiled despite everything. "That little Italian place in Montrose. You ordered wine that cost more than my rent. You let me order it anyway, even though I could see you calculating tips in your head." She leaned against his shoulder, exhausted. "You were so nervous you knocked over the candle trying to hold my hand. Nearly burned down the restaurant. The waiter was so rude about it, and you just smiled and tipped him double anyway. That's when I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were going to change my life." They sat in comfortable silence, their shared history more powerful than the machines keeping their son alive down the hall. Nurses moved past them with practiced efficiency, carrying medications and hope in equal measure. "Mr. Turner?" Dr. Harrison appeared in the doorway, his scrubs wrinkled from hours in surgery. "I have news about Ethan." Michael and Danielle stood so quickly they nearly knocked over their chairs. "Is he?" The transfusion worked. His body accepted James's blood perfectly. He's stable, conscious, and asking for his parents. The relief hit them like a physical force. Danielle's knees buckled, and Michael caught her, both of them holding each other as 16 hours of terror finally released its grip on their hearts. "Can we see him?" Danielle asked through tears that were joy instead of fear for the first time since this nightmare began. "In a few minutes. But there's something else." Dr. Harrison glanced toward the ICU. "He heard you talking in the hallway earlier. About paternity, about James being his biological father. He knows." The world stopped. Michael felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been punched. "How much does he know?" Danielle whispered. Everything, I think. He's been conscious longer than we realized. Have you ever found forgiveness in the most unexpected place? When crisis hits, what matters more, the past or the present? Michael walked down the sterile corridor toward James's room, his footsteps echoing in the late-night quiet. Through the doorway, he could see his former friend connected to monitors and 4 lines, pale but breathing steadily. James! Michael stepped into the room, feeling awkward and grateful at the same time. James opened his eyes, focusing slowly on Michael's face. How is he? He's going to be fine. The transfusion worked. Good. James tried to sit up and winced. That's all that matters. No, it's not. Michael pulled a chair closer to the bed. What you did today, giving your blood, risking your life, I can never repay that. I didn't do it for you, Michael. I did it for him. I know. That's what makes it so. Michael struggled for the word. Noble, I guess. You saved the son you never got to raise. They stared at each other across the divide of years and betrayal. 2 men who had once been brothers, then enemies, now something neither could define. He wants to see you, Michael said finally. When he's stronger, he wants to meet his biological father. James's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. Are you okay with that? I don't know, but I'm trying to be. The doctor emerged from Ethan's room with news that would change everything. But before he could speak, Ethan's voice called weakly from behind the glass. Dad, which one of you is my real dad? 3 hearts stopped as they realized he'd heard everything. A 16-year-old boy on the edge of death asked the one question 3 adults had been avoiding, and his innocent words shattered carefully constructed lies. The hospital room filled with afternoon sunlight that should have felt hopeful, but instead illuminated the wreckage of secrets. Ethan, pale but alert, looked between 3 adults with eyes that seemed older than his 16 years. So let me get this straight, he said, his voice still weak from the ordeal, but his mind sharp as ever. Dad raised me, James made me, and Mom kept the secret. Did I miss anything? The casual way he summarized their family drama would have been funny if it wasn't breaking 3 hearts simultaneously. Michael stood frozen by the door, afraid to move closer, afraid to speak, afraid that his son, the boy he'd loved and raised, was about to reject him for the lie they'd all lived. Ethan, sweetheart, Danielle started, moving toward his bedside. Mom, I'm not angry. Ethan reached for her hand with surprising strength. I was for about 10 minutes when I first heard you all talking. But then I started thinking. Thinking about what? Michael asked, finally finding his voice.
About how none of this changes anything that matters. Ethan looked directly at Michael, and there was no anger in his eyes, no disappointment, just the same love that had been there for 16 years. You're still the one who taught me to throw a football. You're still the one who sat up with me when I had nightmares. You're still the one who cheered louder than anyone at my games. Michael felt his chest tighten with emotion he couldn't name. But I'm not. You're not what? My dad. Ethan's voice got stronger, more insistent. Because you are. Biology doesn't change bedtime stories, Dad. It doesn't erase little league practices, or help with homework, or all the times you told me you were proud of me. James, who had been quietly observing from his wheelchair by the window, cleared his throat. Ethan, I want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. Your mother and I, it was a mistake. Maybe it was a mistake for you and Mom, Ethan said, looking at James with curious eyes. But it wasn't a mistake for me. I exist because of that night. And honestly, I'm pretty glad I exist. The simple wisdom of a 16-year-old cut through years of adult complications like a knife through rope. Here was the person they'd all been fighting for, and he was handling their mess with more grace than any of them deserved. I have questions, though, Ethan continued, settling back against his pillows. Like, do I have any brothers or sisters I don't know about? What do you do for work, James? And are you going to stick around or disappear again? James rolled his wheelchair closer to the bed. I run oil rigs in the Gulf. I've never been married, never had other children. And I'm not going anywhere, if that's okay with everyone. It's okay with me, Ethan said immediately. But this is weird, right? Having 2 dads? How's that supposed to work? Michael found himself laughing despite everything. I have no idea, son. I guess we'll figure it out as we go. Can I call you both Dad? Or would that be too confusing? The question hit both men like a physical blow. Michael looked at James, seeing his own shock reflected in the other man's face. You can call me whatever feels right to you, James said softly. I've been waiting 16 years just to have a conversation with you. I'll take whatever name you want to give me. Dad and Papa, maybe? Or Dad and James' dad. This is going to take some getting used to. What would you tell a child who discovers their parentage isn't what they thought? How do you explain adult mistakes to innocent hearts? Later that evening, after James had been wheeled back to his room and Ethan had fallen asleep, Michael and Danielle sat in the quiet hospital corridor, processing the day's revelations. He's stronger than we are, Danielle said, her head on Michael's shoulder. He always has been. Even when he was little, remember? When kids at school would tease him about something, he'd come home and explain to us why they were probably just having a bad day. He gets that from you. That ability to see the good in people even when they hurt you. Michael turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time in years. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you back then. I'm sorry I made you feel invisible. I'm sorry I lied to you for 16 years. I'm sorry it took our son almost dying for the truth to come out. They held each other in the hospital hallway, two people who had loved each other badly, but completely, who had made mistakes that somehow led to miracles. What happens now? Danielle asked. Now we figure out how to be a family. All of us. That's terrifying. Yeah, but look at what we've survived already. I think we can handle whatever comes next. The hospital room that had once held crisis now held hope. Three adults who had learned to love beyond rules surrounded a boy who had taught them what family really meant. Ethan's wise acceptance should have solved everything, but the hospital social worker entering with legal documents proved that society had different rules about families than 16-year-old boys did. Love doesn't recognize court orders, but custody laws care nothing for the bonds that save lives, and now three adults had to fight for the right to be a family. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters and cameras, their questions like bullets aimed at a family already wounded by truth. Behind the marble columns and legal proceedings, three people discovered that fighting for love was harder than falling into it. Mr. Turner, is it true your son isn't biologically yours? James Morrison, are you seeking custody of a child you abandoned for 16 years? Ms. Brooks, how long have you been lying about paternity? Michael wrapped his arm around Danielle's shoulders, shielding her from the worst of the media frenzy as they pushed toward the courthouse entrance. James followed behind them, still weak from his blood loss, but determined to face whatever legal battles lay ahead. This is insane, Danielle whispered as camera flashes exploded around them. Yesterday, we were a family in crisis. Today, we're scandal. Yesterday, we were private citizens, Michael corrected. Today, we're front-page news in a city that loves to watch powerful people fall. The courtroom smelled like old wood and older secrets. Judge Patricia Wells presided over family court with a no-nonsense attitude of someone who'd seen every possible variation of human messiness. Today's case was unusual even by her standards. A custody dispute involving a billionaire CEO, his ex-wife, and a biological father who just saved their son's life. This is highly irregular, Judge Wells began, reading through the hastily prepared documents. Mr. Morrison, you're seeking joint custody of a child you've never met, who doesn't know you exist, and who has lived his entire life believing another man is his father? Yes, Your Honor, James's lawyer replied. My client has recently discovered he has a son, and he wishes to establish a relationship with the boy. And Mr. Turner, you're opposing this request despite the fact that Mr. Morrison just saved your son's life? Michael stood, his lawyer beside him. Your Honor, my concern is for Ethan's well-being. He's just recovered from a life-threatening medical emergency. Adding the stress of a custody battle and forced visitation with a stranger seems cruel. I'm not a stranger anymore, James interjected, earning a sharp look from the judge. Mr. Morrison, you'll speak through your attorney or not at all. The legal arguments flew back and forth like tennis balls in a match where everyone was losing. Precedent cases, parental rights, best interests of the child, language that reduced 16 years of love and sacrifice to legal terminology. Your Honor, Danielle stood without her lawyer's permission. May I speak? Ms. Brooks, that's highly irregular. Everything about this case is irregular, Your Honor. Please. Judge Wells studied Danielle's face, seeing something there that made her nod. Proceed. 16 years ago, I made a decision to protect my family. I was young, scared, and alone, and I thought I was doing the right thing. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have told the truth from the beginning. But I can tell you this. Michael Turner has been Ethan's father in every way that matters. He's earned that title through sleepless nights and Little League games and homework help and unconditional love. The courtroom fell silent, except for the scratch of the court reporter's fingers on her keyboard. But, Danielle continued, James Morrison proved yesterday that he's willing to die for a son he's never met. He gave his blood, literally, to save Ethan's life. That has to count for something. What are you suggesting, Ms. Brooks? Judge Wells asked. I'm suggesting that maybe the law needs to catch up with love. Maybe a boy can have two fathers if both men love him enough to put his needs first. Should biology determine family, or should love? When society's rules conflict with the heart, which wins? The lunch recess gave them 90 minutes to figure out their lives. They huddled in a conference room down the hall from the courtroom, surrounded by law books that couldn't define what they were becoming. The judge is leaning toward supervised visitation, Michael's lawyer explained. James gets to spend time with Ethan, but only under court supervision until a relationship is established. That's not a relationship, James protested. That's a job interview. It's a start, Danielle said quietly. It's more than you had yesterday. Michael paced the small room like a caged animal. Outside, his business rivals were probably celebrating. The great Michael Turner, brought low by family drama and paternity questions. His stock price had probably already taken a hit. This isn't about business, Danielle said, reading his expression. This isn't about your reputation or your empire. This is about Ethan. I know that, but the rest of the world doesn't. Michael stopped pacing and looked at both of them. They're going to tear us apart in the media. Every business deal, every social event, every time Ethan throws a touchdown pass, they'll talk about the scandal instead of celebrating him. Then we give them something else to talk about, James said suddenly. Like what? Like a family that works. Like three adults who put a child's needs first. Like the kind of story that makes people believe in love instead of gossip. The judge's decision would determine Ethan's future, but the envelope slipped under their hotel door that night contained a threat that could destroy all their lives. I have photos from that night 16 years ago. Pay up or the world sees everything. The past arrived in an envelope with photographs that could destroy 3 lives, unless they were willing to pay the ultimate price for their mistakes. The penthouse suite overlooked Houston's glittering skyline, but inside, 3 people stared at photographs that made their wealth and power meaningless. Some secrets carried price tags higher than any fortune. How did someone get these? Danielle's voice shook as she looked at pictures of herself and James from 16 years ago. Intimate moments she'd tried to forget, captured by someone who'd been watching, waiting, planning. Hotel security cameras, James said grimly, examining the images. I remember that place having cameras in the hallways, but I never thought. Someone's been holding on to these for 16 years, Michael said, reading the typed note that had accompanied the photographs. $5 million. They go to every major news outlet in Texas. The blackmail letter was professionally printed. No fingerprints, no obvious clues about its origin. Just photos that could end careers and a demand for enough money to disappear forever. We pay it, Danielle said immediately. Whatever it costs, we protect Ethan from this. We don't negotiate with terrorists, Michael replied, his business instincts taking over. You pay blackmail once, they own you forever. This isn't a business deal, Michael. This is our son's future. James stood at the window, looking out at the city lights that reflected their success and their failures in equal measure. There's a third option, which is, we get ahead of it. We tell the story ourselves, on our terms, before someone else tells it on theirs. Michael stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You want to voluntarily release photos of you sleeping with my ex-wife. I want to control the narrative instead of letting some blackmailer do it for us. James turned from the window, his face set with determination. We go public, not with the photos, but with the truth. The whole truth, including how we're handling it now. The suite's living room became a war room as they debated their options. Outside, Houston slept peacefully, unaware that one of its most powerful families was about to implode or rebuild, depending on choices made in the next few hours. Think about it, James continued. What's more compelling? A scandal about adultery and paternity, or a story about family, forgiveness, and love triumphing over mistakes? The media doesn't care about redemption, Michael said bitterly. They care about ratings. Then we give them both. We show them the mess, and we show them how we clean it up. Danielle moved between them. These two men who defined her past and her future. What if Ethan gets hurt by this? What if his friends at school, the college recruiters, everyone judges him for our mistakes? They're going to judge him anyway if this comes out through blackmail, James said gently. At least this way, he's part of the solution instead of a victim of the problem. What would you sacrifice to protect the people you love? Is any secret worth destroying your family over? The decision came at midnight, after hours of debate and phone calls to lawyers and public relations experts. They would hold a press conference the next morning, telling their story before someone else could tell it for them. We do this together, Michael said, looking at James and Danielle. All three of us, united front, no blame, no excuses. What do we say about the photos? Danielle asked. We say they exist, they're private, and anyone who publishes them is violating our privacy for profit, James replied. We take the moral high ground and dare them to try to knock us off it. They spent the rest of the night preparing statements, coordinating with their lawyers, and calling Ethan at the hospital to explain what was about to happen. You're going to tell everyone? Ethan's voice came through the speakerphone, still weak but clearer than it had been. We're going to tell them the truth, Michael said. All of it. Good. I'm tired of secrets. And Dad? Both of you? Yeah. I'm proud of you for doing this the right way. The investigation led them through Michael's inner circle, past business associates and household staff, until they arrived at the most obvious and most painful suspect, someone who'd had access to their lives, their schedules, their most vulnerable moments. The blackmailer's identity shocked them all. It was Michael's trusted assistant, Rebecca, who had been in love with him for years and couldn't bear watching him rebuild his family with his ex-wife. The blackmailer's identity shocked them all. It was Michael's trusted assistant, Rebecca, who had been in love with him for years and couldn't bear watching him rebuild his family with his ex-wife. Rebecca Martinez had worked for Michael Turner for 8 years. 8 years of organizing his calendar, booking his flights, handling his personal business with the discretion of a priest and the efficiency of a machine. 8 years of watching him love other women while she arranged their dinner reservations. The confrontation took place in Michael's downtown office after hours, when the building was empty except for security guards and secrets. Rebecca sat behind her desk like it was a throne she'd never wanted to abdicate. The photographs spread before her like evidence in a trial where she was both prosecutor and defendant. How long have you been planning this? Michael asked, his voice carefully controlled. He'd learned in business never to show weakness to someone holding leverage over you. Since the day you call me crying about Danielle leaving you. Rebecca's perfectly manicured fingers traced the edges of the photographs. You were so broken, Michael. So lost. And I thought maybe finally you'd see what was right in front of you. James stood by the window, watching Houston traffic move like ants between glass towers. But he never did. No, he never did. He was too busy building his empire to notice the woman who made it possible. Too busy chasing women who would leave him to value the one who would have stayed forever. Danielle entered the office carrying 3 cups of coffee, playing the role of peacemaker even in this twisted family drama. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. Michael and I hurt each other. Yes. We made mistakes. But blackmail isn't the solution to anyone's heartbreak. Easy for you to say. Rebecca's composure finally cracked. years of suppressed emotion pouring out like water from a broken dam. You gotta have him. You gotta marry him, carry his name, live in his house. You got 16 years of being the woman he came home to, even if you threw it away. Michael sank into the chair across from Rebecca's desk, the same chair where he'd conducted million-dollar negotiations and life-changing deals. Now it felt like he was facing the most important conversation of his career. "I never knew," he said simply. "Rebecca, I swear to you, I never knew how you felt." "Of course you didn't. Men like you don't see women like me. We're furniture to you. Useful, reliable, invisible furniture. Have you ever been invisible to someone who meant everything to you? When does devotion become obsession and love become manipulation?" The photographs lay between them like accusations. Images of vulnerability, of two people seeking comfort in the wrong place at the wrong time. Evidence of human weakness preserved by someone who'd waited 8 years for revenge. "What do you want, Rebecca?" James asked, turning from the window. "Really want? Not the money. I can see in your eyes this was never about money." Rebecca looked at him with something approaching gratitude. Finally, someone was asking the right question. "I want him to hurt the way I've been hurting. I want him to lose something precious, so he knows what it feels like to watch happiness slip away while you're powerless to stop it. You want to destroy his relationship with Ethan. I want to destroy his perfect little reunion fantasy. Him and Danielle and their miracle son, and now you, the biological father riding to the rescue. It's disgusting how easily you all forgive each other while the rest of us live with the consequences of your choices." Michael stood up, his shadow falling across the desk. "Rebecca, what consequences? What are you talking about?" "The pregnancy, Michael. My pregnancy." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Danielle's coffee cup slipped from her hands, shattering against the marble floor. James stepped away from the window, as if the glass had become electrified. "What pregnancy?" Michael's voice barely qualified as a whisper. 3 years ago, after your divorce was final. After that Christmas party, when you were drunk and lonely, and I was stupid enough to think it meant something." Rebecca's voice turned bitter. "As old coffee. I was pregnant for 8 weeks before I lost it. And you never even knew we'd slept together because you were so drunk you didn't remember." The office fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of Houston traffic. 3 people struggled to process this revelation, while Rebecca watched their shock with satisfaction that felt hollow even to her. "I would have remembered," Michael said weakly. "You were drinking yourself to sleep every night back then. You probably don't remember half of what happened that year." Danielle knelt to pick up pieces of the broken coffee cup, her movements careful and deliberate. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Nobody had any idea. That's the point. I dealt with it alone while Michael dated other women and pretended I didn't exist." The photographs suddenly seemed less important, overshadowed by a grief that had festered for 3 years. Rebecca's betrayal wasn't just about unrequited love. It was about loss, loneliness, and the terrible weight of secrets that nobody else carried. "I'm sorry," Michael said, and meant it. "I'm sorry about the pregnancy, about not remembering, about not seeing how much you were hurting. Your apology doesn't change anything." "No, but maybe understanding does." James moved closer to Rebecca's desk, his voice gentle. "What would help? What would make this right? Nothing can make it right. But maybe I can stop making it worse." Rebecca reached for the photographs, her hands trembling slightly. One by one, she began tearing them in half, destroying evidence that could have ruined 3 lives and shattered a 16-year-old boy's world. "The coffee shop," she whispered, tearing the last photograph. "There's a coffee shop on Westheimer where I go every morning. Sometimes I see you there, Michael, buying coffee for whatever woman you're dating. And I imagine what would be like if just once you bought coffee for me." The revelation about Rebecca's lost pregnancy changed everything. Suddenly her betrayal wasn't just jealousy. It was grief over the child she'd lost and the father who never knew she existed. 3 people learned that healing sometimes begins in the most ordinary places. A coffee shop where forgiveness costs no more than a cup of morning brew. The Grind Coffee House on Westheimer looked like 1,000 other coffee shops in Houston. exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the smell of espresso competing with ambition. But today it served as neutral ground for a conversation that could have happened in a courtroom or a therapist's office. Rebecca arrived first, choosing a corner table where she could watch the door and escape if courage failed her. She'd been coming here every morning for 3 years, ordering the same vanilla latte and watching successful people rush past with their important lives and urgent problems. Michael walked in 5 minutes later, looking uncomfortable in jeans and a polo shirt instead of his usual business attire. He'd never been in a place like this. His coffee came from executive assistants or five-star hotels, not hipster baristas with philosophy degrees and attitude problems. "Thank you for coming," Rebecca said as he sat across from her. "I should have come years ago. I should have been paying attention." Danielle entered with James behind her, both of them scanning the coffee shop like they expected photographers to jump out from behind the espresso machine. The past week had taught them that privacy was a luxury they could no longer afford. "This is surreal," James said, settling into a chair that looked like it came from a garage sale. "A week ago, I didn't know I had a son. Now I'm having coffee with my ex-lover, her ex-husband, and the woman who tried to blackmail us all." "When you put it like that, we sound like a support group for people who make terrible decisions," Danielle observed. Rebecca almost smiled. "Aren't we?" Michael ordered coffee for the table, a simple gesture that carried more weight than any of them acknowledged. For the first time in 8 years, he was taking care of Rebecca instead of the other way around. "I remember that Christmas party," Michael said when he returned with 4 mismatched mugs. "Not the details, but I remember being angry and drunk and feeling sorry for myself." "You talked about Danielle for 2 hours," Rebecca said. "About how you'd lost the best thing in your life because you couldn't stop working long enough to notice it slipping away. And then you kissed me. Not because you wanted me, but because I was there and you were lonely and alcohol makes people do things they regret." The coffee shop hummed with morning activity around them. Students with laptops, business people grabbing drinks to go, retirees reading newspapers and solving the world's problems one conversation at a time. Normal people living normal lives while 4 damaged adults try to figure out how to be better than their worst moments. "I regret not remembering," Michael said carefully. "I regret that you went through the pregnancy alone. I regret that you lost the baby without anyone to support you. But I don't regret that we're here now, talking about it. Why? Because secrets eat you alive. We've all been carrying secrets that were destroying us, and finally we're putting them on the table where we can deal with them." James stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "My secret was loving a child I couldn't claim. Rebecca's secret was losing a child nobody knew existed. Danielle's secret was protecting a truth that felt too dangerous to tell. And your secret, Michael, was that you were human enough to make mistakes." "That's not much of a secret," Michael said wryly. "It is when you're trying to be perfect all the time. What secret have you been carrying that's eating you alive? When does protecting others become protecting ourselves from consequences?" The conversation stretched through 2 refills and 3 awkward silences. They talked about Rebecca's pregnancy, about grief and healing, about the difference between love and obsession. They talked about the photographs and why she'd kept them, about the temptation of revenge and the price of holding on to pain. "I need to resign," Rebecca said finally. "I can't keep working for you, Michael. Not after this. I understand. But I want you to know that I'll give you the best recommendation of your career. Any company in Houston would be lucky to have you. That's very generous considering I tried to blackmail you. You tried to get my attention. It worked." Danielle leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Rebecca, can I ask you something?" If Michael had remembered that night, if he'd known about the pregnancy, what would you have wanted him to do? Rebecca considered this, swirling the foam in her latte. "I would have wanted him to care. Not to marry me or pretend he loved me, but just to acknowledge that something important had happened, that we'd created life together, even if we lost it." "I care now," Michael said. "I know it's too late, but I care now." "It's not too late for caring, Michael. It's just too late for us." They parted ways in the parking lot, for people who would probably never be friends but had found a way to stop being enemies. Rebecca drove toward a new job interview she'd scheduled for the following week. Michael, Danielle, and James headed back to the hospital where Ethan was waiting with questions about forgiveness and family. That was harder than the custody hearing, James observed as they got into Michael's car. But more important, Danielle replied. Rebecca deserved to be heard. Michael started the engine, watching Rebecca's car disappear into Houston traffic. She deserved better than I gave her. We all did. The coffee shop conversation had healed old wounds, but Ethan was waiting at the hospital with a question that would test whether they'd learned anything from their mistakes. Ethan asked the question that cut through all their adult complications. If you can forgive each other for the big mistakes, why can't you forgive yourselves for being human? The hospital room felt different now, less like a medical facility and more like a family meeting space where real conversations finally happened. Ethan sat up in bed, color returning to his cheeks and strength to his voice, looking more like the quarterback who'd commanded Friday Night Lights than the pale boy who'd nearly died. "So Rebecca's gone?" he asked after they'd finished explaining the morning's coffee shop conversation. "She took a job with a law firm downtown," Michael said. "Better pay, better hours, and probably a boss who notices when she does good work. Good for her. I always liked Rebecca. She remembered my birthday every year and never forgot to ask about my games." Ethan adjusted his pillows, settling in for what felt like an important conversation. "But I have a bigger question." "Shoot. If you three can sit in a coffee shop and forgive each other for affairs and lies and blackmail attempts, why do you still look like you're carrying the weight of the world?" The question hung in the sterile air like a challenge. Three adults who'd spent the morning talking about healing looked at each other and realized their 16-year-old son was seeing something they'd missed. "What do you mean?" Danielle asked. "I mean you're all still acting like you committed crimes instead of making mistakes. Mom, you lied to protect me and Dad. Dad, you worked too much because you wanted to give us everything. James, you stayed away because you thought that's what was best for everyone. None of that makes you terrible people." James rolled his wheelchair closer to the bed. "But our choices had consequences, Ethan. People got hurt. Yeah, and then you fixed it. You're still fixing it. That's what good people do. They clean up their messes." Michael found himself staring at his son with something approaching awe. This was the boy he'd raised, the young man who'd inherited the best parts of three imperfect adults and somehow avoided their worst tendencies. "When did you get so smart?" Michael asked. "Probably around the time I almost died and realized that life's too short to waste on guilt trips." Ethan grinned, and for a moment he looked exactly like the carefree kid who'd thrown touchdown passes and dreamed of marine biology. "Besides, I had good teachers. We didn't teach you this wisdom. You taught me by example. Every time Dad worked late to provide for us, every time Mom sacrificed what she wanted to give me what I needed, every time James gave his blood to save someone he'd never met, those were lessons about love, not perfection." The hospital room suddenly felt too small to contain the magnitude of what a 16-year-old boy was teaching three grown adults about forgiveness and grace. "There's something else," Ethan continued, his voice taking on the serious tone he used when discussing college plans or career goals. "I want to change my last name." The announcement hit like a physical blow. Michael felt his breath catch. Danielle gripped the bedside rail, and James went very still in his wheelchair. "To what?" Michael asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Turner Morrison, or Morrison Turner. I haven't decided which sounds better." "Ethan, you don't have to," James started. "I want to. I want my name to tell the truth about who I am. I'm both of your son, and I want everyone to know it. How do you measure love? In years spent together or blood spilled to save a life? When does a name become more than letters on paper?" The conversation turned practical. Legal name changes, school records, college applications that would need updating. But underneath the logistics ran a deeper current of acceptance and belonging that transformed a hospital room into something approaching sacred space. "What do your friends think about all this?" Danielle asked. "They think it's cool that I have two dads. Some of them are jealous, actually. Tommy Henderson says having one dad is hard enough. He can't imagine dealing with two." "He's not wrong," Michael admitted. This isn't going to be easy to figure out. Nothing worth doing is easy, right? You taught me that. James cleared his throat, emotion threatening to overwhelm his voice. Ethan, I want you to know that whether your last name includes my name or not, I'm honored to be your father. Both of us are. I know, but I want the world to know too. They spent the afternoon discussing practical arrangements, where James would live, how they'd handle holidays and birthdays, whether they'd tell people they were divorced and remarried, or create some other explanation for their unusual family structure. We'll figure it out as we go, Danielle said finally. We'll make mistakes, probably big ones, but we'll keep talking and adjusting until we get it right. Or until we get it good enough, Michael added. Perfect families don't exist, but functional ones do. And loving ones, James said quietly. And honest ones, Ethan finished. Finally, the late afternoon sun streamed through the hospital windows, painting the room golden and peaceful. Outside, Houston continued its relentless pace of business and ambition. But inside, for people had found something more valuable than oil or success or even reputation. They found their way back to each other. There's one more thing, Ethan said as visiting hours began to wind down. The media's been calling, wanting interviews about our unique family situation. Absolutely not, Michael said immediately. Actually, I think we should do it. 3 adults stared at their son in shock. Hear me out. We can keep hiding and let other people tell our story, or we can tell it ourselves. Show the world that families come in all kinds of shapes, that love doesn't always follow the rules, and that sometimes the messiest situations create the strongest bonds. The boy who nearly died was ready to live loudly, openly, and without shame. The question was whether the adults who'd raised him were brave enough to follow his lead. Ethan's decision to do a television interview about their unconventional family sent shockwaves through their social circle, but also opened the door to something none of them expected, becoming a symbol of modern family resilience. A nationally televised interview would either destroy what remained of their privacy or transform them into a symbol of modern family resilience. And Ethan wasn't giving them a choice. The television studio lights were hot enough to melt makeup and harsh enough to reveal every line that stress had carved into 3 adult faces. Ethan, however, looked completely comfortable in his chair, like he'd been doing interviews his entire life instead of recovering from a near-death experience. Are you sure about this? Michael asked for the 10th time, adjusting his tie nervously. Dad, you've closed billion-dollar deals in front of cameras. This is just talking about family. This is talking about our family to 20 million strangers. Good. Maybe some of those strangers are dealing with complicated families too. Maybe our story helps them figure out their own. The interviewer was Sarah Chun, no relation to Dr. Chun who'd saved James's life on the airplane, a veteran journalist known for asking tough questions with compassionate delivery. She'd built her career on getting people to reveal more than they intended while making them feel safe enough to be vulnerable. We're live in 60 seconds, the floor manager announced. Danielle reached over and squeezed Michael's hand on one side, James's hand on the other. 3 adults who'd loved badly, but completely, now facing judgment from a world that preferred simple stories to messy truths. Turner Morrison family, Sarah began once the cameras rolled. Thank you for joining us today. This has been an extraordinary week for all of you. Extraordinary doesn't begin to cover it, Ethan replied with the easy confidence that made him a natural leader on the football field. But we're not here to talk about the drama. We're here to talk about love. Love doesn't usually involve paternity surprises and blood transfusions from biological fathers you've never met. Why not? Love is messy. Anyone who tells you it's simple is either lying or hasn't experienced the real thing. Sarah turned to Michael. Mr. Turner, you've built an empire based on precision and control. How does it feel to have your most private family matters become public discussion? Michael looked directly into the camera, addressing the millions of people who would judge his choices and his character based on 30 minutes of television. It feels terrifying and liberating at the same time. For 16 years, we've all been carrying secrets that were eating us alive. Finally telling the truth, all of it, Feels like setting down a weight I didn't realize was breaking my back. Ms. Brooks, you kept this secret for 16 years to protect your family. Do you regret that choice now? Danielle had rehearsed this answer a dozen times, but sitting under the lights with America watching, she decided to speak from her heart instead of her prepared notes. I regret the pain my silence caused, but I don't regret protecting my son when he was too young to handle the truth. Every mother makes impossible choices trying to do what's best for her children. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't, but we make those choices out of love. And Mr. Morrison, you gave your blood to save a son you'd never met, nearly dying in the process. What drove you to take that risk? James looked across the studio set at Ethan, this remarkable young man who carried his DNA, but Michael's values, Danielle's kindness, and a strength that belonged entirely to himself. I spent 16 years watching him from a distance, proud of the man he was becoming and heartbroken that I couldn't be part of making him that way. When I finally had the chance to give him something, to be useful to him, nothing else mattered. Not my safety, not the complications it would create, nothing. Is blood thicker than water, or is love stronger than both? When society's rules conflict with the heart, which deserves to win? Sarah leaned forward, her voice taking on the intimate tone that had made her famous for getting people to reveal more than they planned. Ethan, you're the person everyone's been trying to protect, but you seem remarkably well-adjusted for someone whose world was turned upside down. How do you process having two fathers? The same way other kids process having divorced parents or step-families or any other situation that doesn't fit the standard model. You figure it out, you love the people who love you, and you don't waste time worrying about what other people think is normal. But this situation is unusual even by modern standards. So, unusual doesn't mean wrong. It just means we're writing our own rules instead of following somebody else's. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from custody arrangements to college plans to the business implications of their public revelation. Through it all, for people presented a united front while maintaining their individual voices. Before we end, Sarah said, I have to ask about the future. Where do you see this unconventional family in 5 years? Together, Ethan answered immediately. Maybe not in the same house, maybe not following traditional patterns, but together, supporting each other, celebrating each other's successes, helping each other through the hard times. Isn't that what family means? Mr. Turner, do you agree? Michael smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached his eyes. I agree with everything that young man says. He's wiser than all three of us combined. Ms. Brooks, I see us at Ethan's college graduation, probably arguing about who gets to sit where, but all of us bursting with pride. I see us at his wedding someday, walking him down the aisle together because he has 3 parents who love him. I see us growing old and telling embarrassing stories about each other to his children. And Mr. Morrison, I see us proving that love doesn't have to follow rules to be real. That families can be messy and complicated and still be beautiful. That sometimes the best things in life come from the worst mistakes. The cameras stopped rolling, but the conversation continued off-air. For people who'd been strangers or enemies or secret keepers had become something new, a family that defied categorization but couldn't be denied. The interview aired 2 days later to an audience of 23 million people. Social media exploded with opinions ranging from admiration to condemnation. But one response surprised them all. Applications to adoption agencies and foster care programs increased by 30% nationwide as families inspired by their story decided to open their hearts to children who needed love, regardless of biology. They become accidental advocates for the idea that love creates family, not the other way around. The studio interview was just the beginning. Their story went viral, sparking debates about modern family structures and inspiring other unconventional families to share their stories. But the real test came when they returned to their daily lives in Houston. 6 months later, they'd become the family they'd never planned to be: messy, unconventional, and stronger than any of them had imagined possible. The football stadium where Ethan had collapsed looked different under Friday night lights. Less like a place where lives nearly ended and more like a stage where dreams came true. 6 months after the crisis that changed everything, the Turner Morrison family sat in the stands watching their son throw perfect spirals to receivers who caught them like prayers answered. "He looks good out there," James said, adjusting the stadium blanket across his lap. The blood loss had taken longer to recover from than anyone expected, but he'd grown stronger through physical therapy and the daily routine of being someone's father. "He looks happy," Danielle corrected, watching Ethan scan the field for open receivers. "That's more important than good." Michael split his attention between the game and his phone, where business emergencies competed with family obligations for his time and energy. But tonight, family was winning. Turner Industries stock is up 12% since the interview, he reported to no one in particular. Apparently, America likes companies run by people brave enough to tell the truth about their complicated lives. Or maybe they like companies that prove love conquers all, James suggested. "Love doesn't conquer all," Danielle said, watching Ethan complete another touchdown pass. "But it does conquer most things, and that's usually enough." The past 6 months have been a masterclass in building relationships from scratch while maintaining ones that already existed. James had moved to Houston, buying a house 10 minutes from Michael's mansion and 15 minutes from Danielle's apartment. Close enough to be present, far enough to maintain independence. They developed routines: Sunday dinners at Michael's house, Wednesday coffee dates that rotated between the three adults, Friday night football games where they all sat together and pretended not to notice when strangers pointed and whispered. "Remember when we thought this would be impossible?" Danielle asked, passing popcorn down the row. "I remember thinking it would be impossible for about 24 hours, Michael replied. Then Ethan started giving us instructions on how to be his family, and impossible became inevitable. The scoreboard showed Westfield High leading by 2 touchdowns with 5 minutes remaining. Ethan's team was headed to the state playoffs, and college recruiters had started calling again after a brief pause when the family drama hit the news. "Have you decided where you want to go to college?" James asked during halftime, when Ethan jogged over to the stands to grab water and check on his parents. Parents, plural. Ethan grinned, sweat-soaked and glowing with the confidence that came from doing what you loved in front of people who loved you. "I like the sound of that. And no, I haven't decided. I'm waiting to see which schools offer the best marine biology programs and which ones let all 3 of you visit without causing media circuses. We could always disguise ourselves," Michael suggested. "Dark sunglasses and fake mustaches." "Dad, you're a billionaire CEO who just did a national television interview about your unconventional family. There's no disguising you." Fair point. The second half flew by in a blur of successful plays and mounting excitement. With 30 seconds left, Westfield scored their final touchdown, securing their playoff position and Ethan's place in local sports legend. As the team celebrated on the field, 3 adults climbed down from the stands to congratulate the young man who taught them how to be better than their worst mistakes. "Great game, son," Michael said, pulling Ethan into a bear hug that lifted him off his feet. "Thanks, Dad." James waited his turn, still learning the rhythm of physical affection with a son he was getting to know. "That last pass was perfect. Couldn't have drawn it up better." "Thanks, Papa James." The nickname had evolved naturally over the months, distinguishing between the father who'd raised him and the father who'd saved his life. Danielle hugged him last, maternal pride radiating from her like heat from a bonfire. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Not just for the game, but for how you've handled everything this year." "I learned from the best," Ethan replied, looking at all 3 of them. "All of you. What makes a family? Shared blood, shared history, or shared commitment to love each other through anything. When the world watches, do we become who they expect us to be or who we choose to be?" Later that night, after team celebrations and post-game interviews, the 4 of them sat on Michael's back porch overlooking the pool where Ethan had learned to swim and the yard where he'd thrown his first football. The same spaces where they'd built their first version of family were now witnessing the construction of their second, more complicated, more honest version. "I have an announcement," Ethan said, settling into the outdoor furniture with the casual confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. "I've been thinking about the future." "College decisions?" Danielle asked. "Beyond that, About what happens after college, after football, after I'm done being someone's son and start being someone's husband and father. 3 adults held their breath, waiting for wisdom from their child. I want to study marine biology like I planned, but I also want a minor in family counseling. I want to help other families figure out how to love each other when life gets complicated. That's a beautiful goal, James said quietly. It's a practical one, too. You 3 taught me that love isn't enough by itself. You need communication and honesty and the willingness to keep showing up even when things get hard. Other families could probably use those lessons. Michael looked at his son, their son, this remarkable young man who'd taken the mess 3 adults had made and transformed it into something approaching wisdom. When did you get so smart? He asked, echoing the question he'd posed in the hospital 6 months earlier. When I realized that the best teachers are the ones brave enough to show you their mistakes, not just their successes. The evening wound down with comfortable conversation and comfortable silences, the kind that only happen between people who know each other well enough to fill gaps without words. Eventually, James excused himself to drive home, and Danielle kissed everyone goodnight before heading to her car. Michael and Ethan sat alone on the porch, father and son in the way that mattered most, through choice rather than chance. Any regrets? Michael asked. About which part? Any of it. The truth coming out, James being in our lives, the media attention, changing your name. Ethan considered this seriously, the way he approached all important questions. No regrets about the truth. Truth is always better than lies, even when it's messy, eh? No regrets about James. He makes both of us better people. No regrets about the media attention. Our story helped other families, and that matters more than privacy. And the name change? Ethan Turner Morrison. He said slowly, testing the sound. It fits. It tells the whole truth about who I am and where I came from. Why would I regret that? They sat quietly for a few more minutes, listening to Houston's night sounds and processing the complexity of their rebuilt lives. I love you, Dad, Ethan said eventually. I love you too, son. Both of your fathers do. I know. And you know what? Having 2 fathers doesn't make me love either of you half as much. It just means I have twice as much love to give. Michael smiled, understanding finally why his son had been so wise about forgiveness and family construction. Love, it turned out, wasn't a finite resource that had to be rationed carefully. It was renewable energy that grew stronger the more you used it. 6 months after their world had nearly ended, they'd built something entirely new. A family that proved love could triumph over biology, truth could triumph over comfort, and hope could triumph over fear. The blood betrayal had become a blood blessing, and 4 people had learned that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones brave enough to break all the rules. In the distance, James's car pulled into his driveway, home to the house where he'd learned to be a father at 45. Danielle's apartment glowed with warm light, where she'd found peace with choices made in love and fear. Michael's mansion held memories of a family that had died and been reborn stronger. And somewhere in Houston, other families dealing with secrets and complications saw their story and decided that love, however messy, was always worth fighting for. The blood betrayal was over. The blood blessing had just begun.